So we're going to finish up what we talked about with Python introduction. I'm sorry I went long last time, and we'll cut off at a good time this time as well. But nice thing is it plays well with what Dr. Nelson already taught us. So first I want to start with the actual follow-up activities. So you get 2 homework assignments, I guess, 2 follow-up activities this time. What I want you to do, because I think you could have listened to everything I just said, Dr. Nelson said, and what I said last time, and you won't learn much, right? You'll be familiar with some of the terms, but I think it's worth actually going and doing something with this so you actually get familiar with it. So this is what I want you to make. A CSV parser. I don't know, that's probably not the best name. But what it's going to do is it's going to take in a CSV file and it's going to choose certain columns to output. And so that's going to be your task. And I'm going to show you some of the steps on how to do it. You're going to have to learn a lot to actually get this done, but I want to show you the steps to get that going. And this will play well into what Dr. Mengelson is going to teach us with NumPy and pandas and other ways. So you're going to first do it the hard way, and then maybe after you're going to learn how to do it the easy way.
You're going to run all of that in your virtual environment, right?
Exactly. Run it all in your virtual environment.
You got to get a virtual environment first.
Before we get to that, I wanted to make sure people are familiar with this kind of, I don't know, syntax, usage message, right? You've all seen this, right? You do -- help to typically get this, or -h. But this is an important thing to understand. Unfortunately, there's no right way to do this. Everyone kind of can be dependent on who wrote the program, but there are standard conventions that people tend to follow. So first of all, can someone tell me what these square brackets are around these -h and -c? Yeah. Not positional. This would be positional right here. Optional, yep, very good, optional. So that means it's an option. But here we got position. So what this is saying is that CSV parser has to take in a file, a CSV file specifically, and it has other things, -h, -c, -v. And what those are, it describes it. So here's positional right there, and then optional arguments right here. I wrote all this help stuff, so it's probably not that great. But yeah, so this is, it's important to understand how to kind of grep this and understand how this works before you can build one yourself. But this is an important skill to have because people are going to expect to do -h to get help and not have it delete all the files on your hard drive. Let's say, you don't want to have sensible defaults. So just remember, this is the end goal. I mean, you don't have to understand all this yet. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand more of it and how to actually go about doing it. But I just wanted you to have the goal in mind of this is what we're going to be doing. I'm going to say something else too about that. Okay, no, let's get started. So let me bring up code. Okay, that's what I was going to say. Where we left off was that we want to really be able to reach out into the world, or let the world reach into us and be able to do things. And so that's what we're doing here. That's what we thought this would be kind of a simple example where you have to read in a file, getting some data from somewhere. You're going to output the data, you have to parse it. So we're dealing with file IO, we're dealing with command line arguments and stuff like that. And there's even a extra credit assignment where you can actually go out to the internet and download stuff if you want. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, let me make this bigger for you. Is that big enough for back there, or do you want it a little bit bigger? Bigger. More? Don't have screen space. Okay. So here, so the first thing you're going to want to know is argparse. Argparse is not something that's built into Python. It's not something you have to download, luckily. So let's go to here. Argparse, to fulfill the assignment, you're going to have to read it. I'm not going to teach you everything you need to, and it's actually a very powerful tool. It can do a lot of things for you, and it's amazing. If you ever done this in C or in other languages, this actually is such an improvement on all the capabilities it has and how much it just gives you. So you'll need to know argparse. That there's a link to that right here. So you'll have that on the page. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we import it and we create an argparser. So we're creating this object, argparser, and we're going to add arguments to it. This is an example I took from the documentation. I thought this was kind of the base essence of what an argparser would be. So we're going to add an argument --foo. So -- typically means it's the long name of an option. So let's run this, see what happens. So Python tutorial. Okay. So what it did is it printed out the arguments. So foo is none. I didn't provide foo, so that makes sense. It's none. Just ignore the namespace. I don't know why, but they put it into some weird namespace object, but it's okay. You could do dot without that. That's how you actually access them. Okay, so sure, nothing there. So let's add something to foo then. Okay, so foo test. Should have bar, I guess. So yeah, so there, just magically, just in 3 essentially lines of Python, we already have some amount of argument parsing. That's great. Put in a number. Let's see what happens if we put in 2 things. I think this is going to fail. Yep. Makes sense. It thinks it's 2 arguments. It is 2 arguments. And so it's saying, hey, you gave me more arguments than I should have. Okay, so that's great. Any questions on this so far? I mean, this is a lot of magic right now, but I mean, it hopefully makes sense. But if you've ever done this in another language, then already this is a huge improvement.
By default, is it always a string? It always treat the argument.
Yeah, so that's a good point. Yes, it is by default a string. So that's
Types though, that's one.
yeah,
of the-
yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah.
With everything in argparse, you can change it.
So first, let's say, well, typically conventions are that usually have the long name where you do dash dash and the long name, and then sometimes you have a short name for it. So that's just with 1 dash, so dash F in this case. So we can quickly do that. So this is saying, hey, this is the short name, F, this is the long name, and then the help. Okay, so let's run that. So if I do foo test, that still should work fine. Let me save my file. Okay, so now I can do just dash F. And it still knows, oh, that's still attached to foo, the long name, but now it's a shortcut. Yeah.
Does that have the capability to do like combined options as well? Like if you had a dash F and a dash V, but if you just did dash FV, would that work? Can you do combined ones?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. I think that should work. Yeah, I think it should work. I'm sure there's some way to, I don't know if it's default and
Yeah, I know, and
Pretty
like,
sure it's
I know,
default.
I would imagine so, but it had to be certain types because like, for example, these it says it takes an argument, right? So it would make sense to combine.
not that one specifically,
Yeah.
but if you didn't take an argument, yeah.
Okay, so we got to the, I just want to make sure, okay. So let's say, well, I mean, right now it's, we don't include it, it prints out none, but maybe we don't want it to be none, so we can add a default value. Default equals bar. So what we can do is if no one provides F, then it's a bar. So that's great. Maybe you don't want, maybe none is what you want, but maybe you don't. Maybe you want it to be bar. And now just, we didn't really talk about this last time. These are all parameters, all here, but these are named parameters. So you're essentially giving the name of it. And that's, you don't actually have to do that all the time, but it's kind of nice if you have a parameter list of 5 things, people are gonna get lost and wait, what are all these different things? So typically after the first couple of parameters, the obvious ones, then you'll put the actual name of the parameter. So that we know it's default, and we know this is help. Okay, so that's that. Now let's look at type. So far, I think as was it Dr. Manguson pointed out, that it's always interpreting as a string. It's got the quotes around it, so it thinks it's a string. Maybe we don't want it to be a string. Let's do type is equal to int. And let's get rid of this default because that doesn't make sense anymore to have a default. Now, one kind of weird thing here is that type is actual, not a string int. It's actually the object int. So be careful about that. We're saying this is the type right here. Try that. So now it doesn't have the quotes around it. Now it thinks it's 50, or it's actually number 50. So let's put in bar. Let's put in a string. Right there, tell us, oh, that's invalid. You gave it a string, it was expecting an int. Right there, that's awesome too. Very helpful. Okay. Let's see, okay, let's do one more. This will be helpful for you. Let's say we want this to be, we don't really want a value. We just want to know if it's there or not. They often call those flags. Just want to know. So a verbose flag, -v just means like, hey, turn on verbose. So what we can do there is we can say, turn to a flag. So we'll say the default is false. What we can do is an action. Say if this flag is provided, then perform some action. And store, what is it? No,
Or true.
is it store true? Yeah, I was questioning myself. True. That's coming off my screen. Sorry, this should wrap.
Gives them more desktop if you make your window bigger.
Okay, is that okay? Why is it not wrapping? Okay. Surprised it's what do we call it? The formatter's not. Okay. So what we've done, okay, so here we provided bar, and it's now saying that doesn't make sense in this case. Now let's just do dash F, and we say it's true. It was true, right? Or we can do, if we don't provide it, then it's false, which is the default. So right there, we got a flag mechanism. That will be useful. What's that?
I was just say you can take out the default in that case. It'll put it in for you.
Okay, nice.
With store true, it sets the default for you.
That's cool. Great. So this, if you're gonna follow this assignment, then that's something you're gonna want to have for verbose, right? You're gonna want to have some kind of flag to let you know, should I be logging stuff out or should I not be logging stuff out? Let's do one more, because this is also something you'll need for assignment is an action where you append. What this is going to do, say, well, what if you want to have F repeat multiple times? There's examples you want to do that. In fact, that's what I want you to do for this one is that you can have multiple columns. You want column 1, you do dash, for column 1, you do dash 0 for, 0 index, and dash C, I said that. So dash C0, dash C1 for the first 2 columns. So what you can do is this action append. So this will let you have that argument multiple times and it'll just append the value to it. So let's run that. None, okay. This is right. Well, let's not have it. Good, and then dash F, 10, dash F, 20, dash F. That created a list for us. Just magically just said, okay, well, I'm going to append all these together. Every time I see a dash F, I'm going to append. This is just scratching the surface. I mean, there's so many cool things. I feel like I learn something every time I look through this documentation. Just to give you a taste of it, there's like choices, so you can have it like limited to a set of choices. Here, I actually thought the first example was kind of pretty intense already for being like the first thing that you see. So here, and now we can copy paste if you want to run. Actually, let's copy and paste it to run just so you guys can feel the power of Python. Okay. Oh, there you go. That format works. Okay. Python. Oh, tutorial. Okay. So let's run it without anything. Good. Oh, I didn't ever run these with dash H. So the nice thing is it does it, just for free. It just gives this for you. It formats everything the right way and it prints it out really nicely for you. So that's awesome right there. We didn't ever actually specify we wanted a dash H. It just gave it to us by default, which is nice. Okay, so what this is doing is saying, let's add an argument called integers. I'm not going to go into detail. You don't have to catch any of this, but I just want to use the power. The meta variable is what should actually look like on the command prompt. N. I wouldn't want it to be called num integers. That's not descriptive. That's too descriptive. We want it to be called N. So you can actually override what it looks like there, what its type is, how many should it have. The plus means it has to have 1 or more. You have to have 0 or more. You can have 5, 6. I mean, we can have whatever you want. In this case, it's 1 or more. So that's the 1 is required. But then in brackets, it's N ... or more. Help message. Okay, so that's right. That's just how we get integers. So let's do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then what we add is another argument. This is where it gets kind of magical. It's called dash sum. And it's going to be set to a variable called accumulate. So you can override what the variable name is. It would have defaulted to sum, but for some reason they wanted to change it to accumulate. Here's the action, store constant. Here's the constant it's going to store if that flag is there. It's going to sum them. But if it's not there, which is in this case, it was not there, it's just going to do max. And these are both functions in Python, built-in functions. It's going to call max on your list. So accumulate becomes a function. I don't know. So I just want to show you the magic of it. So by default, it takes the max value of your list. So let's test that out. 1,000. Okay, cool. So it did that. Sorry, that. Okay. And then if we add the dash dash sum, then it's actually going to sum them up. So just right there, just that, very, essentially 2 lines of Python code. I mean, I know it's multiple lines broken up for the format reason, but can do all these crazy stuff. So, just to let you know that you don't have to do this kind of crazy stuff for the assignment, but it's worth knowing that you're able to do it. So look through this, read it, and try to understand it best you can. Any questions on argument parsing? This is a really important skill to have because people aren't going to want to use your stuff if it's, doesn't have a help message or it's some weird format or just it doesn't play nice with the Unix philosophy. Okay, cool. That one's probably most involved. So let's go on to reading files. So we've all read files before, right? Python makes it pretty easy. Here we open a file. It's called word is open. It's another built-in function built in Python. We're going to open example.csv and name it a file F, and then we're going to print that out. We're going to close it. So let's run that real quick. Okay. So F is some kind of object, a text IO wrapper. Okay, so that's not very helpful. So let's actually read in the contents of this file. Okay, there we got the file. So by default, reads in the whole thing. Let's say we just want to read the first 10 bytes. Do that. Cool. And that. So this is, and then we have to close the file, of course, right? We don't want to just leave it hanging out. Okay, I want to do this distance. So this is one way to do it in Python, but this is not the preferred approach. I would say you shouldn't ever do this really. Much better way.
But it's the C approach.
Yes, definitely C. That's why I wanted to show you it because this is the approach you're familiar with. And let me show you the true way to do it. The Pythonic way, right? Python has this idea of what's called context managers. And it starts with the keyword with as F. So what this is doing is it's saying, hey, with this file, as you're naming it F, run these commands. And so what is, under the hood, what's happening is when you enter a context manager, it runs some code for you. And then when you exit it, meaning you've left the scope of it, you go unindented, it runs other code for you. So in case of a file, it will open the file for you. And then when you leave it, it'll close the file for you. So it's a really handy way of dealing with things. And then you don't ever have to deal with forgetting to close your files. You just use the with statement, and then it'll magically just be taken care of for you. Context managers work way beyond just files, but that's one instance where you'll see it early on. So let's test this to make sure it runs properly. Good. So it's exactly the equivalent, but now you don't have to worry about closing your files. Okay. Now, let's see. Let's go back to this. It's really handy. It just read the whole file for us. That's awesome. But what about if we have a big file? 40 megabyte CSV file. Run that. Okay, so it's taking a long time to print out. But let's look at our usage here. Let's go to Python, memory usage. It's showing up. Python. Run it again. Wow, our application is using 47 megabytes. This is tiny little program here, 2 lines of Python code using 47 megabytes. Does anyone know why that's the case? I mean, just we can have it sleep. By default, using more like 7 megabytes. So it's a lot bigger. Why is that happening? Why is it so big? It's not because of Python. It's something I'm doing in my code. Something fundamentally wrong with my code, kind of.
Does it have to read out and buffer in that whole file before it starts printing it?
Yeah. So it's when I told read, it's reading. Maybe I should make it a little bit more clear where I have my data is equal to that. I'm storing in a variable. I have to store in memory. Is that what you're going to say up there? Is that cool? I have to store it in memory. And some of that's okay. If it's a couple kilobytes, megabytes, I don't know, even 40 megabytes, probably who cares? But you're eventually going to reach that gigabyte file or 10 gigabyte, or let's say even a terabyte. You're working with big data type stuff. You can't load that all into memory. Your system's going to crash. It's going to be much slower. You're going to run into issues. And so there's better ways of doing that in Python. So let's look at those ways. So one way that Python provides is you can do f.readLine. In fact, you can do read lines. Let's try that first. What it'll do is it'll look for the line breaks and then put it all in there for you. So print data. This isn't going to solve the problem. Let's do this small file again. I don't want to. This is still loading it all to memory, but I just want to show you. What it does is it takes it and puts every line into a list. So that's kind of cool. We can actually do a little bit better than that. We can say, let's just read one line at a time. So it's read one line, and that's it. So what we can do is we can do like while true, print out the lines, and then if data, what is it? Let's do that. If not data, break. Let's say if it's an empty string ever, then we know we should just break out that while loop. So let's try that. That's cool. So that works. Let's do the big ones. Now we'll see. It's still going to take us very long to execute, to print out. But we see here, now we're only using 4.6 megabytes. So we're not reading it all. We're just reading line by line. That's great. That's a nice feature of Python. But it actually does this one better because it's saying most of the time, Python tries to be reasonable. So, well, what do people usually want to do with their files? They usually want to read line by line. Not always. If it's binary, you don't want to do that. But so what you can actually do, the simplest is just do a for loop for it. For line in F. Python's smart enough to know if you iterate over a file, if you put in a for loop essentially, it will just give you line at a time. So you don't have to do this whole while loop and breaking out of it. It just gives you it. And you have the same benefits of that. It's only 4.6. You're reading line by line, or you're able to process that in a for loop. So really clean, succinct code, which I like. Okay, any questions on that? So that's a little bit of file I/O.
I just think, well, what if you wanted to go like character by character? Would you have to do like f dot get chars or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, you could do read, f.read, 1 byte at a time.
Okay.
And you could read until it runs at the end of file or, empty string. Okay, there's so much more to file I/O, but this is just what I thought would be important to you. So like with your CSV parser, I've given you links to both the small file and the large file. So try them both, see what happens, see how well it works under both cases. If you want to be able to handle a large file, I mean, honestly, it's only 40 megabytes, so it's not that bad, but you'll want to read that file line by line. Okay, now for extra credit, just for those that are interested, I want to just barely touch on let's get rid of that real quick, on how to do this, how to go out to the internet and get files itself. I found it interesting. I was like, so what's the way to do this without requiring a library? Request is a third-party library that we had to install into an environment. So I said, okay, well, I know Python has this HTTP client. So I was looking through that documentation. The first thing I see, also see the request package is recommended for a higher level. So the official Python documentation says, hey, go use requests. Don't use this library.
So what you could do is what I did incorrectly was I used the wget, command line argument, the system
Subprocess.
with
wow.
wget.
Yeah, that's
My
tough.
tough.
Yeah. Don't do that. I mean, it works. It definitely works, but that's painful. That's
Well, yeah. When you don't know about requests, you do what you know.
yeah. You do what you know. Definitely. No, that's fine. There's
Bash scripting.
So I just thought that was interesting. That even so, they're like, I mean, if you need low-level stuff, then yeah, I use this. But request honestly does 99% of things you want. This is what it looks like. I don't know if pay attention for this. They actually started this for humans thing with Python of like, oh, everything for humans. It's like because it's actually meant to easy use type of stuff. Okay, so let's do this. So let's do.
I was just gonna say that's probably worth just stopping and mentioning. I mean, sometimes you may think, oh, I know how to do this on the command line. I should issue off a command line call from Python. And that's you like say, oh, I want to copy a file. I'll just issue off a CP command. That's usually the wrong thing to do. You go find the Python library that does file copy operations and stuff like that. The reason is because if you issue off a shell command, you're not going to get like error messages back or nice Python exceptions and see what the error was and things like that. It's just going to work or not.
You can, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's more work. Plus, you don't get much visibility into what's going on. So
And just
some of the errors, but yeah, it's a lot more work.
just for the reference, this is what we're referring to is there's a library in Python called subprocess, and it'll essentially kick off, shell for you.
I don't know what to do when you do some process.
And so subprocess.run, this is running ls-l, onto your, so I would say this is your last resort. I would, Google for an hour before you go to, don't follow Dr. Berthland's.
Hey, when you're old and you've done things the old way,
Teach an old dog new tricks, I guess, yeah.
If everything you're doing is just in subprocess, you might as well just do bash script at that point.
So
Like some things that's just easier option.
that's what we're referring to here. It's got issues, so try not to use it, but sometimes you have to. I've been there, you have to, or maybe you just don't know the right
I
way.
use subprocess.
I mean, really, all the time?
Well, because I'm calling like Vivado and stuff like that,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's the key. If you're calling canned programs, possibly of your own creation, it's the only way to do it. But if you're doing things that you could have typed it to shell, like command, making directories, listing files, no, there's a Python library.
Yeah, like sometimes you might have a C program you wrote that's doing low level stuff, but then you have Python that's doing high level and you get stuff back from it. I know there's ways to compile some C and work with Python, but like sometimes subprocess is just the easier way. But
Yeah, so this is requests. Let's get to google.com. So what it's going to do is going to request, let's not print out text yet. Let's just print out R, see what happens. So we went out to the internet, went to google.com like your browser does, and downloaded it. It didn't tell us what it downloaded. It said, hey, this is a response object, and it was a 200. That means success in HTTP status code. Okay, that's not very useful. Let's add back this text. Let's get the actual text of what this thing was. And there we go. We got glorious google.com and all of its weird JavaScript beauty. It always amazes me what JavaScript people do. Okay, so that's requests. Let's do something a little more, marginally more useful. Let's do one of my favorites is API.net. Is that what it is? .org. This will tell me what my external IP address is. That's my external IP address. So I went out to the internet. They have an API that just gives us plain text back of what your IP address is. That's useful sometimes. Okay. Well, let's say we want to get the contents of a file. Let's say these files. So let's copy the link here. Paste it in there. And let's print that out. There you go. Just from the internet, using this link, we download that CSV file and did all sorts of stuff. Let's do the large one just to make sure that this is working properly. I know it.
Not much. Phil knows requests inside now. Oh, yeah, he does.
So notice it's taking a while because it's having to download 40 megabytes of data. Now it's printing it out. So that's extra credit. I don't need want you to necessarily understand this. I think it adds a lot of power, and you can see how simple it is to use. It's just .get. But if you're interested and familiar with Python, you get done with your other assignment early, then it's worth exploring this. Okay. So like I said, let's go back to this assignment. Hopefully this makes more sense now. You're going to use argparse to generate all this. You get this for free. You're going to have to say, well, I need a columns. Add an argument for columns for verbose, and then an argument for CSV file. You're gonna have to append for this one to have multiple. And what it should do, let me demo it for you, I guess. Let's do that just so you understand better. I got my implementation right here. I don't want to show you it because I don't want to give it away. Okay, there it is right there. So what I can do is say, example .csv. Right there, if, I'd have the help still. Let's get rid of that. So right now, if you don't provide any columns, it's going to print out all the columns because you didn't select any. But let's say we want column 1. No. Oh, sorry, it went up 2. So that helped. There. So just what it did is line by line, it said, I'm going to strip off all of the columns except for column 0. Let's add column 1. Let me do this without that. Cool. Column 5. So there you go. I don't know. It's not the most useful thing. It might be useful if you have, for example, this data that I gave you, example data, this is air quality data from purple air sensors. I don't know what half of this stuff is. I know what most of these things are, but I don't really care minutes, uptime minutes. So let's strip that out of there, so would be a way to do it. So there is some actual utility to this application, but there are better ways of doing it than bringing your own utility, but still. So that makes sense then, that what the assignment is. And so if you were really fancy, you could say, well, I'm going to, and I actually didn't implement this. So you could put a URL here instead of a file, and then that using request download it. Okay, any questions on the assignment or anything that we talked about so far? Okay. Just in closing, I'd say that there's so many interesting topics with Python. With comprehensions, someone is going to be talking about that in one of back there. You're going to be talking about that for your presentations. That will be a great talk to go to. The list comprehensions are really beautiful. There's generators which are related to the list comprehensions. There's Lambda functions. There's so much deepness to Python to learn. Just as an example, you can actually write another programming language on top of Python. Because Python gives you access to the actual abstract tree, the syntax, you can actually introspect Python within Python itself, that people can actually write other programming languages on top of it. So this one person wrote a Lisp language, so Lisp, a functional programming language that is written like this, but actually doesn't compile, it runs as Python. So you can import Python modules. And I just think that's so cool that, this language is capable of producing other languages and doing all sorts of interesting things. So please learn Python. It'll be a great skill to have for your research, for your job, for just life. So that's it.
I'm just gonna add, maybe you're thinking when you see the assignment, I bet there's already a CSV parser out there. And that is the right thing to think always,
Yes.
but not in this case. We want you to actually do something.
That's a good point. Yes.
Not the Pythonic one.
Yeah, typically don't write it yourself. But write it yourself this time. Okay, any questions on that? Yeah.
So our assignment is to make a CSV parser.
I want you to write a script, that mimics this exact help message. I mean, you don't have to do exactly word for word. And then does what I described and what I showed you, where it selects columns. I mean, you can add more features you want. I mean, I kind of think it'd be cool to have it like not a column. Here I'm including columns. It'd be cool if you had like a pen for don't include these columns, and so all the columns except for this one. I don't know. You could add whatever you want to it, but this is the assignment. We'll be grading you. So
By the way, it's not that hard to split, right? You can use like a split command to split the line, right? No?
we don't want to tell them that. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, there's a dot split.
Well,
The secret's out.
Well, the thing is, like to parse, you're not intending them to do regular expressions or anything like that.
That'd be great. Yes, we should have them do regular expression. No.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I'm just joking. There's no, I should tell you that, I guess. There is to help you out. You can do dot split, and you can split on any string you want. So let's comment this out. Let's run this.
But you're right, the point is not to use nothing. The point
Right,
is
the
just
point is
not to use a canned CSV
Right,
parser.
you
but
don't have to,
No, I guess
should use good function calls.
build your own.
So print. So it takes this one string and converts it into a list. And notice how I put the space in here. That was purposeful, because if I didn't do that, it would include the space in there. I probably shouldn't actually, now I think of it, because what if you typed it like this and it wouldn't have split on it? So this doesn't have to be a super robust CSV parser. I don't really care. It's just more of the general practice for it. So
Rejects, can you put rejects in split?
I don't think so. I mean, there's definitely a regex version of split, but you might have to create an object.
That'd be a pretty simple solution for that.
Probably, but
Strip white space after you split.
yeah, you strip right. So that'll be a very important thing to use. So I mean, just the general process be do your argparse, get the file, read the file line by line, call split on that line, and then get the columns that you need from it, because it'll now be a list. So you say, oh, I want item 0, I want item 2 from that list, and then print it out. It's the general process you follow for this. So yeah, split.
Sorry, I didn't mean to give
No, I was joking. You're right. I don't want people to have to search for a split. That's okay. Any other questions? Or any other thoughts from? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Good luck.
Shane,